Bookends, Zoom edition, produced by the Wadena County Historical Society and Travel and Story Seller in collaboration with the New York Mills Regional Cultural Center. Bookends is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Five Wings Arts Council, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. You'll have to excuse me, I'm fighting a cold this week. Bookends programs from earlier this year are now available on the website for the Wadena County Historical Society at www.wadenacountyhistory.org. Today's program will also be available on the website shortly. And this month's speaker is Bart Sutter, primarily a poet. Mr. Sutter enjoys working in a variety of genres. He has published poems, essays, and stories in dozens of magazines and produced 9 books, the most recent of which is the Nordic Accordion, Poems in a Scandinavian Mood. Bart Sutter is the only author to win the Minnesota Book Award in 3 separate categories: in fiction for My Father's War and Other Stories, in creative nonfiction for Cold Comfort, and in poetry with the Book of Names, New and Selected Poems. Mr. Sutter was also appointed Poet Laureate of Duluth, the first in Duluth history. He has written for Minnesota Public Radio, has had 4 verse plays produced, and often performs as one half of the Sutter Brothers, a poetry and musical duo. Let's see, sorry. Next month, BookEnds is on January 9th will be an interview with Deborah Eckerman Pitton, author of No One Left Behind, An Unexpected Educational Adventure at Machu Picchu. And this month's Bookends Online Edition features, oh wait, that repeats. Never mind. So we're going to go right to our author, Mr. Bart Sutter. Welcome, Mr. Sutter.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Lina. Thanks to all of you for plugging in today. And I have to say that I'm pretty happy to be doing this through Wadena, because our dad grew up in Detroit Lakes on a small farm on a hill overlooking the lake. And we've had lots of stories from his childhood. And Wadena is one of the legendary names that comes up, and those folks down in Wadena and so on. So that's fun. And it was just last year, I think, that Ross, that's my brother, Ross and I had performed over in Perham. I believe it was when there was a contingent a carload of them from Wadena, Lina, and I believe Kent Shears and the Paper Boys, and maybe more, had showed up. So that was pretty fun. And the next day I got a tour there in Wadena. Wadena Hide and Fur.
Okay.
There are lots of surprises in that town, as there are lots of prizes
Read over your shoulder, I suppose.
Okay, whatever.
many small.
I'll just walk over.
Lina, do you need to mute the audience?
Yeah, I need to do that. But I need to unmute you too, so don't.
You just muted yourself.
It's Jack and Barb. You got to mute yourselves, you guys.
Mute yourself. No,
How do we mute?
not on the bottom usually.
Bottom left-hand corner, click on the mute.
Okay. Got it.
I can hear you, Bart.
Yes, now? It's good? All right. So I thought I would, for a theme today, I have kind of double themes. I thought you might be interested to know how a small town Midwestern boy ended up leading a literary life. It seems kind of unlikely, and having some success anyway in a variety of forms. I could sell myself as the ambidextrous author because, as Shelley said, I have published in several different genres, and I've worked in theater some, and I've written some songs and book reviews and a whole range of things. And so I thought it might be a little bit interesting to have a sampling from all of those, and we can talk as we go along. It's a bit of a mystery to me too, how, given where I started from, that I ended up with such a literary life. But you never know. Some of you may know the work of Bill Holm from Minneota, Minnesota, the late Bill Holm, a great personality and a very fine writer. And he said he lived a huge part of his life in Minneota, small town. And he said he had finally realized there was no predicting where art was going to come from. And his experience, the welder's daughter might end up being a concert pianist, and the preacher's son might end up being a welder. It's just, he gave up trying to predict. And I taught at way too much freshman English at University of Wisconsin-Superior in my later years. But we had some fun. And for me, one of the most enjoyable things was opening day, when I would ask the students to introduce themselves and say, among other things, where they came from and where they were going, what did they hope to be. And there were, I will never forget the day, there were a couple of young women sitting straight out from me. And one of them said, I'm from Walnut, Wisconsin, and I intend to be an opera singer. And we moved on to the girl beside her, who said, I'm from rural Walnut, and I'm going to be an opera singer too. So I went away from the class that day laughing to myself. And those two young women forced the music program at this small state school to establish an opera program. And I later saw them performing in some operas here in town. Most amazing. In my own case, I spent the first 6 years of my life up on the Manitoba border in a town named after my brother called Ross, which had a total of about 15, 20 people in it, almost not there. North of nowhere and almost not there. To the casual eye, anyway. People would think there was no there there. Later, we moved on up to, actually down to the Iowa border, to Petersburg, population 50, and then later to Allentown, Iowa, population 200. You could see we were moving on up, getting more cosmopolitan as we moved along. So kind of an unlikely place, maybe, for a writer to come from. But, authors get asked about their influences, and people are looking for writers that they've read who've changed their lives. But I believe, along with William Stafford, that the deepest influences are much closer to home. And in my case, growing up in these villages probably resulted in the deepest influences. For one thing, we were set right there in the natural world, and it was terrifying because the cold and the blizzards could kill you. At the same time, there were blueberry patches nearby. You could walk along the river and see no one else. There were bears roaming the country. I'm talking about up in Ross. And that the appeal of the natural world has lasted for me my life long, and a lot of my writing has been about it, has been about the natural world. Also, we had the joy of experiencing technological poverty. We had a stand-up console kind of radio that we'd gather around on Saturday nights for the serial dramas, and a little green plastic kitchen radio, and that was our source. We did have a phone. The original parsonage that I lived in had an outhouse, and they built a parsonage while I was there. So, life changed some, but it was quiet. There was a lot of silence. There was all the solitude I wanted, more than I wanted, but I got used to it, you know. And there I was wandering around. My brother Ross, you know, it was 4 years before he came along. And the first couple of years, my conversations with him were pretty one-sided. So there was a lot of talking to myself, talking to animals, talking to the trees, seemed completely natural. And I'll say this now, moving into my 70s, the last couple of years, I've been feeling a pretty strong brotherhood and fellowship with that little boy I was, who did not mind spending part of an afternoon sitting in a metal culvert with a stick, you know, playing on the ribs of the steel there, making his own music and talking to himself and hearing it echoed back to me. It seems I'm very comfortable with that now, and I can kind of feel him walking along right at my side. There was lots of reading. That was our primary form of intellectual entertainment, I suppose. And one or the other of my parents would crawl into bed with me every night and read aloud to me. And eventually, you know, I learned to read myself, and there was some reading back and forth. I remember with great fondness, and this was especially important, a big yellow book full of stories. And in one of those stories, there was a blank left for the parent to fill in the name of the child. It left a big impression on me. It felt as if some boundary had been crossed and I'd moved right into the story, and it felt as if it was possible. I think it began to move me to think about my own stories, and that this was a natural sort of thing that anyone could do. Here's another. I'm a preacher's kid. Still. That meant there were read alouds every day from the Bible. We had what we called devotions after every evening meal. So there was always reading aloud then. I heard at least one sermon a week. I saw my father writing sermons. And the thing is, he was, in his ordinary life, he was a pretty quiet man, Swedish, you know. Quiet, gentle. Come Sunday, he puts on the magic robe. He stands up in front. There's a big booming voice coming out and a different kind of language than he used in ordinary life. And I think that really impressed me with, though I didn't have words for it, awareness of different levels of diction, different language, different levels of vocabulary, and the difference between ordinary speech and something I'd call utterance, which is a kind of level that you tend to move through, you know, to get to poetry, ordinary speech, intensified or electrified or elevated. I'd say too that my one piece of luck is that my mother's mother lived to be 97, and she was a fabulous gossip and terrific storyteller. She was the last living survivor of the Great Hinckley Fire, which meant that she was an infant in arms when she experienced it, but she remembered every detail and invented many more. Her story got better and better as the years went on. So, you know, anytime around here, around this beloved person, we would get recitations of many stories and enough stories out of her life that we'd ask for them to be repeated. Okay, one more strange, slightly strange or antiquated now, I would say, habit or cultural activity in those villages is that when the weekend came, Sunday for sure, Sunday afternoon especially, we would do what we called going visiting. And this meant very often that you didn't announce that you were going to see a friend or acquaintance. But the family would get in the car, you'd go on a drive, and you'd stop, say, at the Johnson's place. And this could lead to dinner. This could lead to storytelling. This could lead to singing around the piano as the evening wore on. I got dropped a lot as a PK with babysitters, with families that would just take care of me. So I saw the insides of a lot of houses, a lot of homes, a lot of farmhouses. I saw animals being butchered. You know, it was an education. And of course, lots of different relationships too. I still today measure the state of the world according to a kind of yardstick, which is based on those, some of them subsistence farms that I spent lots of time on as a kid. And according to that yardstick, we're not doing too well, right, these days. What's the health of a small farm? In any case, I would like to read what I think is still one of my best poems, which harks back to one of those small, diversified farms and a woman who took care of me a lot. This is in my book, The Book of Names. The poem itself was written, I think, in my very early 30s. And it is named after the woman here that I meant to honor. She was famous for kindness, Geneva, and yet she could run down a hen and chop off its head just like that. Macaroni, I said when I saw the insides, and she crowed like a satisfied rooster. I once watched her husband, the only man I knew who had a mustache, string up and slaughter a cow. I ran to Geneva and buried my face in her lap. Geneva, I said, does it hurt? That old cow, said Geneva. Don't worry, she said. You don't feel a thing when you're dead. Geneva giggled and taught me to piss in the dark in a thunder jug. I was from town and embarrassed, but Geneva enjoyed that noise. She taught me itchweed and outhouse. She spanked me and wiped my ass. She was a good one, Geneva. The world was a joke, and everyone said, she's a real card, that Geneva. She had warts and a nose, Geneva, and a twisted smile with teeth. But she also had beautiful daughters, hay and fresh faces and breasts. They could cook. The kitchen had pails, and everyone drank from the dipper. I can taste the tang of the tin and smell that slop bucket stink and the fragrance of bread on the table. She was always baking, Geneva. She taught me the stars, Geneva. It was night in the garden. She was giving us something again. Carrots, cucumbers, tomatoes and such, everything cool and slick. Chicken shit, said Geneva. That's the secret, she said. My pants were all wet with the dew. Look at that, said Geneva, and showed me the star-spangled sky. It's a coloring book, said Geneva. It's all dot to dot. Don't you see? And I saw the sisters, the hunter, the bull and the bear, the dipper from which we all drank. So I thank the stars for Geneva, all of her muscles and fat, that quick chicken killer, that ugly she of the beautiful daughters and prize-winning hogs, that woman of pickles and jam. Geneva, she taught me the mud and the stars. And when I am ready to die, she will come with her hatchet in hand and her face like a kerosene lamp and her dress all feathers and blood. She was a good one. That's a little bit of that. That's a little bit of that northern Minnesota Norwegian accent. You know, you can't do that poem without being appropriate for its particular setting. So I'm going to say that, given those 5 or 6 basic deep influences that I mentioned there, it's probably not so surprising that I ended up being a writer. With the father, I saw writing every week and so on, with all of that reading aloud and so on. But it is surprising to me that I wound up being a poet primarily, because I can't say that we read poetry much. As a young person, I thought poetry was, there's pretty much the kind of thing that you read in greeting cards or get well cards or Mother's bunch of sentimental lies, mostly, or certainly inadequate to whatever you were trying to truly convey. So I was revolted.
Come on.
Pardon me? But I think I sort of got hurt into poetry because our mom got sick with cancer and had a long, gruesome illness and then died just about the time I turned 13. And within a year, I was writing poems pretty regularly. So I would say as a form, primarily as a form of therapy. Could have been something else, but that was an outlet for me. And I would say probably that there's an element that goes on working in poems altogether. And if a poem is really successful, it may even have some healing qualities to it. I think that's one of the reasons that people turn to poetry. But it's got to be just more than just self-expression and a form of therapy for yourself. But along the way, after at least 3 or 4 or 5 years, a writer will begin to become more interested in the language itself and its elements. And then you have a chance to produce something, I think, that might be of value to someone besides yourself, which is one of the tests, isn't it? I turned to fiction. I wanted to write fiction also, and that's seems more natural because everybody loves stories, right? And I had been around good oral storytellers, and clearly we had been reading a lot of fiction when I was a kid. But to do poetry and fiction and, essays, and who knew what else I was going to do. I just thought I'd do it all. And that's unusual and crazy. Probably there aren't that many writers that succeeded at all. But my brother Ross's wife, Mary, has found the answer for that sort of impulse. She said, "You guys grew up in towns so small. You got a real inflated sense of yourselves." She grew up in South Minneapolis, okay? She said, "We were specialized. By the time we got to junior high, you were in band, or you were a football player, or," right? You'd already selected out. The kinds of places we grew up, 8 boys would come to your porch, knock on the door and say, "We need you for the baseball team. We got 8 guys. We know you don't like baseball that much, but if you don't play, there isn't going to be a team." And so suddenly you're a baseball player, right? And they needed you for the choir, and they needed you for this and that. And you had just enough experience that you thought, you guys get so you think you can do anything. So that's become a standing joke in Ross's family. He and his wife go into a furniture store. She sees something she likes. He said, "Oh, I'll make you one of those, honey." No, but not really, but it's a bit like that. So I tried a number of things, and I worked on stories, and they were good enough to be published and won an award. This is My Father's War, my first and only book of short stories, and that's a picture of my dad from Detroit Lakes there on the cover. It's too difficult, really, to summarize an entire story in read it in a setting, but I thought I would just read the introduction to one of these stories. The majority of my stories were fairly autobiographical or biographical fiction. But in this case, a colleague, a history prof who'd grown up on the Iron Range in Upper Michigan, came from a very working class family, got himself a PhD in history. I'm always interested in people like that, the tension between those two worlds, academic, highly educated, and working class. They end up not being really fully at home in either one of them, but living out some tension between the two. So this was an interesting guy. And he told me one day about his grandfather, who had been a miner, who in late old age had gone out to the lake cabin, written in the guest book out there, a long letter to the family, laid down in bed and just passed away. It was a pretty good story, especially with more details. But I really wanted to read that letter. This was like a final last testament just before this guy slept himself away. And I didn't have the letter, but I kept thinking about this all the time. So the only solution was going to be for me to write the whole story, in which I could also write this letter, invent this letter for the grandfather. You see how that works? Get gnawed away at for a while until you're going to do the job yourself. Of course, I didn't know what this grandfather looked like. I knew he was an alcoholic. Well, so was one of mine. And so I ended up, for physical description, inserting my maternal grandfather. And this is how, of course, a lot of fiction writers work. It's just mix and match. Got to base it on something. So here's the introduction to that particular story. My granddad, Hack Bart, was a big old bastard, 6 feet tall and heavy set, with a chest like an overstuffed suitcase. He was fat, but he didn't look fat. His hair was thick and he brushed it back in a silver pompadour. His forehead was high, his cheeks were pink, and his eyes were a scary blue. He was a handsome man. But it didn't do him any good because everybody in Bessemer knew he was cranky and drank like a largemouth bass. When my grandma Hackbart died, there wasn't a widow in town who would even consider him. He couldn't take care of himself. He wasn't ready for the nursing home, and he only had a small pension. So the son of a bitch moved in with us. He took my room. I was 8 years old when Granddad came to live with us, and he was still in the house when I left for college. I grew up with him. Granddad was family, and I hated his guts. Story have some lean? Where's this story going to go? Who wants to say how this story is going to turn out? Bueller? Anybody? Anybody? It'll be a reconciliation. Huh?
I want to know the end.
Well, the granddad dies, of course. And after reading the letter, of course, the son has a sort of reconciliation with the grandfather, now safely dead, of course. But he and his dad are standing there with whiskey in their hands, toasting him. And in the course of this extended toast, essentially reliving his life by calling him these various names that essentially recount what sort of a guy he was and how he lived his life. When I had done a book of stories, I thought finally I would write a novel. It had seemed a bit, in the 1920s and 30s, one would set out to train yourself by writing short stories. And there was a good market for them too. You could make a living from it, actually. And that would give you the basis to jump to a novel. Well, I finally had a small fellowship and I was moving up towards 40, so I thought this is the time. And this is when I had moved to Duluth. Had a lot of time alone then. So I gave it a run. It was winter, I remember. It was dark. I managed to write 2 chapters. And I stopped. And I got depressed. And I thought about jumping off the bridges. It was a difficult, dark winter. Because that's what I had all along thought, well, you can make a living from writing novels. That would be a real possibility. And I found out, I was stuck and I couldn't go on. And I finally realized I don't want to go on. So that was my education in learning that I was not a novelist. I could see that to write a novel, I was just going to have to make things up. Yeah, it's called fiction. And it's not that much in my nature. So somebody, can't remember, Victoria, I can't remember, a memoir writer had written in an essay, the difference between fiction writers and memoirists / poets. That is, she linked the two. She thought people who write memoir, autobiography, and poets are more alike than either of them are like novelists. That is, novelists play the game of what if, let's put this in this and see what happens. What if? It's the devilish twinkle in the eye, I know I've seen it many times in friends who are fiction writers. Whereas those who write memoirs and poets are generally asking, a whole lot of the time they're asking, what the hell happened? And trying to get that down and trying to figure that out in their own lives. Doesn't mean they can't use fiction from time to time, but it also seemed to have more with do with being, a sprinter rather than a long distance runner. That's another essential sort of difference. So writing was for me in a lot of ways, a big find out. Let me try this skill in this direction. I've got enough apparently to do this kind of thing. Do I want to stick with it? Not necessarily. So poetry for me has always been central and always the main road that I keep coming back to for a variety of reasons. But I have had a good time and kept my spirits up and my brain interested by keeping open to trying different things along the way. Now, I had done that book of short stories, right? My Father's War. And in the process of promoting that, I did interviews, right? And it had gone pretty well at Minnesota Public Radio. And a couple of weeks after we'd finished that, producer there called me up and said, how would you like to do, I'm starting a new series, how would you like to do commentary, a short essay every week? Well, I had to, you can write about anything you want to. I thought about it for a while, I'm a Swede, I'm worried. This could go badly. I could be overcommitted. So I called her back and said, I can't do weekly. I only get about one idea a month. Would that work? Could I do one a month? And so I took that on and got to broadcast them myself also, go down to the studio here in Duluth and record it. And then it went out all over the state. Well, they were going to give me 2 minutes. 2 minutes is one double-spaced page. And I had not really done much in the way of personal essays. I'd written, critical essays in college and whatnot, college courses, but the personal essay, so there was some learning on the fly there. I remember that the first one that I did gave me all kinds of trouble. And the reason was I really had 2 essays that I was trying to do as one. Once I realized that and broke them out, it went better. And within a few months, I was having a great time, because an essay is an expansive kind of, you can throw anything in there, you know, little poem, song. Pretty soon, because of the broadcasting, I wrote one about the aerial lift bridge in Duluth. And so I could describe the horns on the bridge, and not only describe the horns, but do them short, short, you know. It was fun. It was fun. And I went on doing that for 6 years, and essentially I could write a book then about Duluth and the surrounding region, and it ended up being a collection called Cold Comfort, Life at the Top of the Map. And I thought I might read you most of one of those essays. It won't take too long. Here's that book, Cold Comfort. It won't take too long, because remember, they only gave me 2 minutes. But I kept cheating till they got to be 4 minutes, and then 6 minutes. And then the producers called me up and said, you know, this is a really nice essay that you sent, this latest one, but we think 8 minutes is a lot of radio time. And we're going to ask you to, maybe you could break it up over 2 months. So I did that. And we got to do like the second session. As you recall, the last time we were driving up the North Shore, this is about one of my neighbors, whom I called the Cider Man, a name that actually in the neighborhood stuck with him. Paul Staklinski lives just up here a few blocks from me. I'm not sure how his pressing parties come to pass. Paul sends out a couple postcards, makes a few phone calls. People gossip and word gets around. I showed up early one year with 2 bushels of Harrelsons I'd picked off our tree, teetering on a creaky stepladder, my face in cool, dry leaves. Other folks appeared before long with boxes, bags, and baskets of their own. Not to worry. Our host already had plenty of fruit stacked up around the chopper. Paul is an apple outlaw with many secret sources. He picks all through the fall, keeping his eye out for vacant lots with forgotten trees and abandoned farms with orchards going wild. He'll pick 100 bushels in a season himself, so there's always a strong supply. Everyone found a job. Somebody switched on the chopper and we were underway. A couple of adults took charge of dumping apples in the chopper tray, snatching out the bad ones, making sure we got a mix of sweet and tart varieties. Teenagers stood by with sticks, controlling the flow, clearing out the jam-ups. Somebody changed buckets underneath the chopper and hauled the mash to the press, where we dumped it into a big nylon bag, which we dropped inside a wooden cage. The mash was so heavy it pressed itself. Juice ran through the slats of the cage as soon as the bag hit the boards. Somebody moaned, somebody whooped. My partner dropped the lid on the cage and I spun the wheel that lowered the screw that squeezed the juice from the apple mash. Cider ran into the buckets like rain. Praise God, from whom all blessings flow. The cider was good again this year. Tangy and sweet, full-bodied and strong, rich as home-brewed beer. After half an hour, I took a break and looked around at my neighbors, dumping apples in the chopper tray, at a woman using a baseball bat to tighten the screw on the cider press, at a boy wheeling a barrel full of apple pulp down the hill to Paul's garden plot. My hands were sticky with apple juice. My clothes were spattered with apple flesh. A man and his daughter were funneling cider into a long line of jugs. Near the wall of the house, a young woman jerked up her shirt and gave her infant suck. In the midst of it all stood the cider man, listening to a friend, his arms crossed, his knees bent, leaning back, laughing at the sky. My God, I thought, this is erotic. This is medieval. This looks like one of those pictures by Bruegel. We were done for the day in an hour, and we went our separate ways, our jugs of liquid gold in hand. But Paul would go on pressing through October, putting on a show for the YMCA, giving the Cub Scouts something fun to do, calling other people in for parties. Back home, I poured myself a short glass of cider and put the jugs out on the porch where they would keep cool. I raised my glass in a solitary toast to the passing season. Half the leaves were already down. What leaves were left were brilliant. The sky was bright, and I was glad. There was trouble overseas. There was murder in Minneapolis. Terrible things were happening right close to home. But I was happy because Paul Stiklinski had invented an autumn ritual that helped hold our neighborhood together, a ritual that built community and deepened all our lives. What generosity, I thought. And where was his reward? I thought I knew. I remembered Paul's laughter as he watched the proceedings at the cider press. And I remembered how halfway through the pressing, we'd run short of apples. Paul had led us then into his basement where he'd laid up his supply. There were boxes by the dozen. The fruit was piled high. What hit me, though, wasn't the number of apples so much as their scent. The air in there was so mysterious and sweet you could get inebriated just by breathing in and out. I thought about that fragrance now as I sipped the last of my drink. I thought how that fruity incense must permeate Paul's house, and how the nights were getting cold and longer now, and how night after night, all through the fall, the cider man and his wife would be drifting off to sleep to the sweet perfume of apples. So I will do, since these things have had fairly sober tone here, why don't I think I should do a love poem here before we finish. Never have a poetry reading without a love poem, right? So I'm married to an extraordinary woman. She can speak about 3 languages. She has a PhD. She sells her pastel art in galleries regularly here around town. She plays the piano. I believe I deserve a medal just for having the courage to stick with this woman and not being completely washed away by her talents. The most embarrassing thing is that she's a better handyman than I am too, you know. So this is a poem in part about that. She's very headstrong, goes through life kind of leaning like this. She's the accelerator in this marriage. I'm the brake. So, for my wife upon the garage roof, I'll say nothing of Donner or Blitzen, just the 60-some-year-old vixen whose rambunctious life I've now shared for several adventurous years, who has climbed upon the garage roof, whom I've handed up her triage stuff, her long-handled loppers and saw, while holding the ladder in awe. She is going right after those branches while I'm telling her, "Hun, don't take chances of trees that are rubbing the shingles." I would rather be married than single. And I've said there are those who would do this, professional men who'd conclude this for less than outrageous pay. But she's never cared much what I say. She's a really formidable kisser. And if she were dead, I would miss her. But the neighbors know well there's no stopping a project on which she's got hopping. At the moment, she's hopped on the rooftop, and it's looking to me like a long drop. Yet she's scooting on out to the edge, which has got to produce quite a wedgie. Then leaning way out with her clippers to snap off offending tree tippers. The power lines fail to electrocute her, which is good because this way she's cuter. Now she's backing her way down the ladder with me feeling gladder and gladder and finding the moral at bottom. Rejoice in your wives while you've got them. Okay. That's a range of work. I've also worked in theater. I've written songs. I've translated some. All of this has maintained interest, helped me along the way. And I guess there's one more thing I should say about sources, in that one of the major influences on my life has been my brother's work as a musician, a folk singer. We have performed together for over 30 years. And though free verse is fine, and I write about half my poems in free verse, traditional forms, meter and rhyme, have been primarily scorned by my contemporaries. But standing beside Ross and listening to him sing old poems that have been around for 300 or 400 years, and seeing the effect they have had on the audience, pretty hard not to give them a try yourself. And so I have one more influence. Okay, then. Do you have some questions? Is there something you would like to comment on here, folks? Shelley, have you taken questions or comments from anyone?
Well, I see that somebody wrote about asking if you had any new poems written during the pandemic. And also they were curious what Donna was baking.
Okay, my friend Donna. Clear that up, Donna.
Okay, so I'm making these. These are called lussekatter. They're Swedish saffron rolls. So they're now on their first rise. They have, I'm assuming you're hearing me.
Yes.
Okay, they have saffron in them. Probably one of the most expensive spices in the world. It's the stamens out of a certain kind of crocus flower, very bright, orangey red color, very expensive. So I always, when I go to use it, I always cross my fingers and hope I've done it all right. And I haven't heated the milk and butter too much so that I've killed the yeast, etc.
How much longer do they have to go? How long do we have to stay here before we get one?
Well, unless I can figure out how to get them across Zoom. Tomorrow is Lucia Dagen. This is the day when Lucia comes with her crown of lights. And in around the world this year, most of the Lucia Dagen festivities are virtual. So the same for here in Duluth, but we have to have our Lucia buns, even if we're home alone. So yeah, so that's, so far so good.
Thank you, Donna.
Oh yeah, you bet. This has been great. You betcha.
Thank you.
Speaking my language here. The question was, had I written anything during the pandemic? I have, but not about the pandemic. Something about me that's sort of contrary that way. So that I will avoid a topic or subject until it's entirely out, until people have moved on, till there's no hope that anyone would be interested in it anymore. Then I'm apt to, kick in. For example, I had a play called Bushed, political, poetical, partly musical, tragic comedy in 2 acts. And it came out, it was actually produced, I think, about 2 months after Bush had left office. So you can see that's the kind of timing that I aim for generally. Pandemic's depressing, but it's not that bad for writers if they can feed themselves and house themselves, because this is what introverts sort of aim for anyway, is fewer social connections and a lot of time alone. And now everybody's doing it. For a change, you feel like, yeah, we got a match here. And I get to strut a little bit now. So I was in a kind of a depression after the last book was published. You know, you get a sugar high for a few months, and then there's almost always a slump because you see, oh, no, this book of poems is not going to sell 100,000 copies. It's not going to save the world, and so on. And the political situation has been extremely depressing to me. About 6 months ago, lo and behold, when there began to be some light on the horizon, I started writing again. And so I have written a lot here lately. And I, in fact, wrote about sickness, though not COVID recently, because I was sick myself. I had something direct to write out of. I will say, and a childhood memory. That is the strangest thing to me, that one can go on, at least I've been able to, mining and mining and mining one's childhood. And I think it was Flannery O'Connor who said, yeah, any fiction writer ought to be able to ought to be able to work that childhood. By the time you're 12 years old, you've got enough material for a lifetime if you take the right angle on it. It certainly was true of the Diver household. I know that. I'm speaking here to my in-laws. Anything else? Any place else you want to go?
Can I tell you about something right now?
Sure.
I got a project that I started last March, and I came up with the idea of giving a chance for people to write poems of hope and reassurance. And we held them at the Poetry Walk at Kent Shearer's place in Wadena. And it kind of grew, and a lot of people submitted some good poems, including you. And so I thought, I think we could build on more about this. So I wrote another grant to the Minnesota State Arts Board and was awarded a creative individual grant to continue this project. I am also a poet, not of your caliber, but I've done a couple of nice little things, I think, fun stuff. And so I hope to write some more poems. Thanks for the encouragement. And also to invite other people to write poems to do this. And we'll do more than the Poetry Walk was a perfect venue for that, because we could be socially distanced and outside and everything like that. But I want to also make it something a little bit more permanent with this grant. So you can contact me on my website, which is linaballard.com, or I work obviously at the Wadena County Historical Society, so you can contact me there also. Thank you for your contribution.
Congratulations, Lina. That's Lina is a force to be reckoned with. She's got, I don't know how many programs going in Wadena and the area, and it's just great. And this is what makes a culture, makes a place interesting. Wadena astonishes me. I met the Paper Boys, had the tour of Wadena Hide and Fur, their company. Absolutely fascinating. Jewish Buddhists in Wadena, Minnesota. Amazing. And Kent Shearer's experimental farm out there.
Yeah.
Working on environmental projects. So easy to look up. It's easy to pass through small towns and think nothing going on here. Let's move on. But they often.
There's a lot going on in a lot of small towns, as you know from your poetry.
Bart, did you mention that your family has roots in Wadena area?
I did. I mentioned Detroit Lakes. Why don't you fill them in on Wadena if you think this is important? It's not Wadena itself, right?
Well, Compton or Bluffton or Deer Creek, or not Deer Creek. There were farmers on the countryside. But that's all I'm going to say, because I've already said more than I should.
Come on, come on.
Say it. Tell us.
Come on, Ross.
Well, I shouldn't have spoken without having my genealogy sheet in front of me, but
Oh, no, we don't want that. We don't want that.
well, it's the area that Grandpa and Grandma Sutter came from, and they helped establish a church there in the rural area. And I think Dad came back to Wadena for years to visit one of his favorite aunts who lived there.
Very nice.
Yep.
Great.
I thought I would read a poem written during the pandemic. This is very recent, so I can't guarantee quality, but it is about being sick. It's called A Visitation. I'm sick of being sick. Sick sucks. My gut's been grinding for weeks, with a few reprieves when the pills banged the bad bugs. Pow! Don't you think of medicine in comic book terms? Little men in hard hats repairing leaky pipes while ducking badass buzzards? For a while there, I felt okay, and learned again how that's a lie. Okay is not okay. Okay is good. Feel bad for long enough. Okay seems mighty good. Well, good looks great. And great's a state we don't deserve except to visit, maybe, like Vermont. Anyway, I'm going to the bathroom now, but stay right here because I'll be back. As I was saying, sickness sucks, in part because it separates you from your body. Ever notice that? Here you thought your body was your buddy you could count on, but suddenly he's gone over to the other side and up and whacked you. Whoever you are you anyone at all once your body's gone? Or it's like some broke down dog, so needy you can't leave the house because you've got a history. You owe her. Plus, you own her. Though now it seems the other way around. There's a mind-body problem here somewhere, but I'm too sick to say just what. However, I can still complain. I've been doing that for weeks. We're good at that, aren't we? I should know. I'm an expert. I used to sit in bars at midnight and listen to the whining rising through the smoke. My boss, my mom, my useless roommate, ish. My job, my class, my crappy car, my rotten life, the moan, the sob, the righteous rant. My God, it was horrifying. And all too much like me. Homo sapiens my ass. Homo complainus, of which I am a prime example, so I won't. Except to say one final time that sickness sucks. And I was stuck in it this afternoon when I stepped out a moment for the mail. And there, in the yard, in the snow, by the low stone wall, stood a 6-point buck in his dark fall coat, proud and unafraid, who held me with his look, his mesmerizing eyes, his pure white throat. Here was health on the hoof. I muttered admiration and moved in the direction of this prince of the autumn rut, who stood just a short shot away. He spooked and jumped the wall, but then delicately high-stepped to a patch of last grass and lowered his body, his beautiful body, beneath the blessing arms of a deep green spruce. Was this a sign, I wondered? Or just a handsome deer who happened by our place? And I said, yes. Feel better?
Yep.
And I'm already thinking, and that poem's good enough. I'm looking forward to reading this in performance and then turning to my brother and his singing a great song. Here's a health to the company. Right, Ross?
Bart, I just wanted to say how happy I am that I got a chance to participate in this Zoom. And I'm just so impressed with all your writings and all your things you shared today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This is one, I have to admit, one of the benefits of doing stuff on screen. Ross and I took part in a program earlier back this summer, and what, Ross, there were people from Japan or China or something tuning into that show. Amazing. So that's a plus. There's nothing like live, I think, but and in person, but
Right.
pretty hard to get over for one of those when you're in Chicago, that's for sure.
That's right.
We could listen to you all day.
Oh, yeah, right. As long as you had some Donna's Saffron
Yeah,
bun.
I'd love to have some of Donna's rolls. Yes.
Oh,
We'll work that out somehow.
Oh, thank you.
It's just another problem. We'll figure it out.
It's a shame they don't have like a smell thing, so you can send the smell of baking rolls to all of us to enjoy.
Right.
No, yeah.
My brother will have that taken care of by the next time.
All right.
That's the kind of thing that interests him.
Uh-huh.
Multimedia presentation with bun fragrance coming in the side.
That probably is not too far away from somebody doing.
I'm sure.
I mean, who would have thought we'd be able to see each other on a Zoom or even on a phone? That was just like,
Yeah.
wow.
Right.
When they first started talking about that, I was like, no way. There's no way that's going to happen. Well, look at us.
Bart and Ross, we enjoyed the visit with you and appreciate everything that you do. So keep us informed. This is
Okay,
Jack
thank
Bart.
Yeah, thank Jack.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bart.
Okay.
hope to see you again soon.
Stay well. Bye-bye.
We're trying.
Love you, Bart.
Farewell. This
Bye-bye.
looks like the end.
Merry Christmas, Bart.
Yeah, you too. Happy New Year. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.